Now, I want to put a little disclaimer up here as we jump into things. Steeler fans, you're probably not going to like this show. You're probably not going to like this show because either you don't want to admit the truth, you're living in denial, or you just don't want to hear things that, while you may admit or you may not admit, that just aren't positive for you. Whatever it is, though, this is another edition of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, coming at you from the Beaver County Auto Studios up above Market Square here in downtown Pittsburgh. I am your host, Mike Asti. There it is on the screen, at MikeAsti11 is my Twitter handle. And I'm here to tell you why the Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, New England Patriots, that era of Patriot football, is the greatest football dynasty of all time. And could absolutely argue maybe to even be the greatest sports dynasty ever. Ever. Absolutely can argue that. Now, I get it. I get it. Many of you are going to bring up the Steelers of the 1970s, at least where football is concerned. And for many years, you would have had the case. It would have been yours. There have been other long runs of success in the National Football League. There have been other franchises that have won multiple championships. There's, of course, other Hall of Fame quarterbacks and head coaches that have won a lot together. There's Joe Gibbs and the Redskins that won 3 championships, but with different quarterbacks, and that was spread out, but 80s and early 90s. There were Bill Parcells and his New York Giants, even though if Scott Norwood would have kicked a field goal for the Bills, they wouldn't actually have lost 4 in a row. They would have at least won 1. That would have changed their legacy, and it would have made him only going 1-2 in his career in Super Bowls and only 1-1 with the Giants. That would have absolutely taken a little bit out of that steam, and Belichick starting there. We know about Don Shula and the undefeated Miami Dolphins, and yes, that's the only undefeated team ever, even though Belichick and the Patriots also had an undefeated regular season. But they went undefeated in the regular season and won the Super Bowl, even though less overall wins because of less games played in that season. And the championships that he won with Greasy. We know about Lombardi's Packers, and they got an argument there. 6 championships and that run of success before the Super Bowl era, and then the 2 Lombardi trophies once the Super Bowl existed. But the competition there was lesser, and those players didn't go anywhere. They were locked into a team. Competition and the level of success, it just was easier to do it, even though they were better than everybody else. You know about the Baltimore Colts around that same time? Could argue Joe Montana, Bill Walsh, and the San Francisco 49ers, and Bill Walsh, only 3 of those championships were his. But Joe Montana won 4. They would then, as a franchise, win another one with Steve Young after Joe Montana left. So that's 5 in a little over a decade. That's a great run for sure, and probably could have argued before now as the greatest run, at least for a franchise, even though different quarterbacks. But for the most part, consistent Hall of Famers were there. Ronnie Lott was there. Jerry Rice were there. They weren't there for all 5, of course. Jerry Rice winning 3 of those 5, 2 with Montana and 1 with Young. But for the most part, the roster was similar. We know about great teams that didn't become dynasties, the 85 Bears, the 2000 Ravens, etc. Great teams. They didn't become dynasties many thought they would be. And again, the 1970s Pittsburgh Steelers. The 1970s Pittsburgh Steelers, which created this, which are the reason why Pittsburgh can lay claim to Pittsburgh named America's best city for football. Now, that's just now, that's present day, but that started in the 1970s with Terry Bradshaw and the Rooney family building it up, and Mean Joe Green and Franco Harris and Rocky Blyer, and that's just a few of the legends and Hall of Famers, Jack Ham, that were a part of that. And 4 Lombardi trophies out of 4 appearances, dominating the decade of the 70s from the Immaculate Reception on, which didn't lead to a championship, but that led to the playoff success. It would then go on before the 80s hit. And Chuck Noll won those 4 Lombardi trophies, and Pittsburgh's going to love him forever, despite maybe the lack of success in the 80s and early 90s before Cowher that also followed with him. But Pittsburgh named best city for football, still here, 2019, present day. They didn't make the playoffs. It was a disappointing year. I covered all the drama on SteelersNow.com and here at Pittsburgh Sports Live, a lot of videos, some of those going viral and getting me blocked by some members of the Steelers because of my takes there. But the drama has certainly proved how interested and passionate this fan base is, and even when it's dramatic, even when it's asinine, this fan base cares. The Pittsburgh Steelers fan base cares. But while you may care and while you may argue for the greatest fan base, maybe, even though there's yinzers out there that don't want to hear this show probably, I've already maybe shut it off, or rolling their eyes, going to throw me some comments and get mad at me there. Throw some tweets my way, slide in my DMs with some hate, and I'm used to it. But the fan base is there. And as much as I get annoyed by the fan base sometimes, I can't deny the passion. I can't deny there are some intelligent football fans, and I can't deny the atmosphere around the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it all started from the 70s, from that 70s Steel Curtain dynasty. And you got to know those players. And it wasn't just the quarterback and coach. You knew that whole roster almost. Many fans could rattle off that entire roster. And Canton in the Pro Football Hall of Fame is just filled room to room with members of the 1970s Steelers. And then it went on, of course, to the end of Noel, which was not as much success, Bill Cowher, even the Mike Tomlin era. And it's the most Lombardi trophies, all the Hall of Famers. Pittsburgh can absolutely argue, the Steelers can argue, as overall the most successful football franchise of all time. And that would be from Super Bowl era on. Obviously, before that, they weren't, and that would then involve the Green Bay Packers. But when we're talking dynasty, when we're talking the greatest dynasty in football history, and you might have said the 1970s Steelers for a while, and you might have then been right. You might have been right then with those 4 championships and setting the tone for a rabid fan base in a region with a team that means so much to this region. You might have been right. The Iowa Hawkeyes wore black and gold as their uniforms in college football, and they did it to pay homage to the 1970s Steelers. So you might be right. But if you want to be truthful and real, the New England Patriots, really, quite frankly, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, just those two, what they're accomplishing is unparalleled, really, in sports, but certainly football. And it is the greatest dynasty in NFL, in football, maybe even professional sports or overall sports history. I don't know about some dynasties for high school football where they just win championship after championship after championship almost a decade straight, or some pee-wee football, okay, maybe then. But professional football where it counts, it's the New England Patriots. It's Bill Belichick, it's Tom Brady. They started this back when the millennial started, when this century began. You watch some 30 for 30 films on this. Watch the two Bills with the Parcells-Belichick union and that drama and their feud. If you want to really learn the history and how Belichick got to New England, supposed to be the Jets coach under Belichick. Belichick screwed him maybe out of becoming the Giants coach after taking over for him due to retirement. He went to the Browns. Get you all there. Go to the 30 for 30. It's the best thing that the mothership does these days. That's one of the better ones, too. Watched it the other day just to freshen up. Because Belichick's still in the consciousness. He's still relevant because he won't go away. But beat him if you want him to. It started then. Drew Bledsoe, great quarterback, Patriot legend, but borderline maybe Hall of Famer, but not obviously Tom Brady. Got hurt. Tom Brady had to get in there. 2001 season. And little kid that was a 7th-round draft pick, Brady 6, another one of those movies. Steelers even drafted T. Martin. Remember him before Brady? And led the Patriots to a Super Bowl championship right away, right from the jump. Belichick and Brady began it where it is now against the Rams. That was Kurt Warner, St. Louis Rams, Marshall Faulk, Isaac Bruce, Hall of Fame players there. Mike Martz, the head coach after Dick Vermeil retires, following their Super Bowl championship just 2 years earlier. So they might have been one of those teams, those great teams that didn't become a dynasty. Maybe they're going to be a dynasty in the making. The Patriots completely derailed. And I know about Spygate, and I know about all the scandal that eventually erupted from there, but they won that game. It was an upset win. Vinatieri with the field goal started the whole thing. They win 2 more championships a couple years later, back-to-back then. So they didn't go back-to-back after 01. They had that little skid there where the Buccaneers won their championship with John Gruden, and that defense finally got solidified. But that's another one of those great teams, didn't go anywhere else. 2003, 2004, back-to-back championships for the Patriots. Again, close games, game-winning field goals. But even then, you can see this team moving a little bit. After the first championship, Lawyer Milloy, maybe the best player on that team, a veteran elder statesman of that defense, gone. He won that first championship, and that was it. Belichick's been on record saying he was the best player on that team. Again, I don't know if that's true or not. That's really subjective and trivial, but gone right away. Wasn't afraid. Wasn't going to overpay for anybody. Wasn't going to put up with any crap, and wanted to get rid of guys a year or two early before their decline hit. That was early on before Belichick even got credit for building the Patriots and the Patriot way like that. Lawyer Milloy gone. 03-04. Brady's still a great quarterback. He's budding, but he's winning championships almost in early Derek Jeter style, where he's a great player, he's an all-pro, but he's not the best ever at that point. He's not in that conversation yet, but he's on a great team around him. Teddy Bruschi and company. Veteran players in that defense, leading the defense really to those championships, while the offense did just enough to win. Maybe kind of game managing, even though a little bit more than that for Brady in that era. Deion Branch, his wide receiver. Deion Branch, there's the name. Deion Branch was a Super Bowl MVP when the Patriots beat the Eagles in that Super Bowl, where the drama of T.O. and McNabb, and T.O. had 9 catches, 122 on one leg, and had to sign a waiver to play. He would have been if they won, but the Patriots won. It was Deion Branch, the wide receiver counterpart for New England. Brady got him the football a few times. And they had the little break there where you had Romeo Crennel and Charlie Weiss, and they would leave and take other jobs, and those jobs wouldn't have nearly the success they had under Belichick, and head coaches, they just wouldn't get it done, and they were gone, and Belichick kind of had to retool his staff. And not only just players, had to retool his staff. And you get to see kind of the end of the line of the Bruskis and that company. But then you bring in a guy like Rodney Harrison, who was a part of that the last 2 of those Super Bowls in the early 2000s. He kind of was still around to kind of now be the leader of the team. And you see a Vince Wilfork get drafted and be a member of the Patriots, and that kind of, helps the line, and it brings up a new era of Patriot football. But they had a few years there where they were obviously still a contender. They're still relevant, but they weren't the best team in football. The Steelers were able to get a championship in the middle there in Ben's second year after losing the Patriots the year before in the AFC Championship game, and Bill Cowher able to get his ring and his championship, and they went as a wild card and bet his fumble, but they managed to regroup for him and carry him off in the sunset. They were able to get one there. And then the Patriots, okay, we got great players and we're contender, but we're not just going to rest on our laurels from the 3 out of 4. Because, guys, here's what's insane. If it's just 3 out of 4 and it's just the early 2000s and they never won any more championships, they didn't do the undefeated season, and they didn't do where we are right now, and it isn't their 9th appearance in the big game, they would still be in this conversation. I could still bring them up. They already would have accomplished the Joe Gibbs Redskins type of thing. They already would accomplish more than the Shula Dolphins with Bob Greasy. They wouldn't be over Lombardi's Packers and probably Montana's Niners, or at least that Niner franchise, but they would have been in the conversation as one of the greatest dynasties in football history, right there. But they didn't rest. They brought a guy in named Randy Moss. Ever heard of him? Randy Moss. And Randy Moss, obviously a legend of the position and a Hall of Famer, ended up being first ballot, first guy since Jerry Rice. Should have been T.O., but still. And at that point, he was a little bit of a malcontent. It was a little bit of Randy Moss, and gone from the Vikings several years with Oakland and taking off plays, admitting he was taking off plays. Gets to New England. Green Bay turns down the trade. They never should have done that, but gets to New England. And Brady and Moss have the best single seasons for a quarterback and wide receiver combination in football history to that point, and they could argue still for it. 2007. They don't just get back to the Super Bowl, guys. They do it in style. They dominate. Junior Seau there. They give you a real star-studded roster. So it's a different roster. There's more all-pros there. You're no longer worrying about Deion Branch and kind of an average receiver, which Brady has to elevate. You're getting a Randy Moss. So where Peyton Manning got Marvin Harrison through most of his career in those MVPs, Tom Brady didn't have anyone like that until getting Randy Moss, who he only gets for a few years. But one of those is an undefeated regular season, and they lose in the Super Bowl to the out-of-nowhere upset Eli Manning, New York Giants, and Tom Coughlin back from the Giants days and his connection with Belichick. David Tyree catch on his head, and the craziness of David Tyree barely getting over Rodney Harrison, and a little boring call from Joe Buck in the big moment that was. And it ends up being a 18-1 year without the Lombardi Trophy. But I'll still to this day contend that's the greatest team in NFL history and the best team of this Brady-Belichick era, at least on paper, and also how they played that entire year, except for that one game. They lose that. And Moss is eventually ushered out, and his career then would flounder. He'd actually go back to another Super Bowl with the Niners, but it pretty much the end of the line for Randy Moss. Got far as 500 touchdown pass in Minnesota, so he did some things, but that was the end of things kind of with the Patriots. Had a great year or two after that, but it was no, they didn't get back to the Super Bowl with him. It was that one fantastic season, historic season still, despite not winning the last game of the year. But they lose Moss. They bring in a guy like Chad Ochocinco. Now I think I got his numbers around there memorized. I believe 20 catches, maybe even 12 catches, 220 some yards. His worst individual season of his career. But they still brought him in. They still took a chance. And you're seeing the emergence of Gronk and that type of all-pro beast tight end, a little difference of the Patriot offense with Wes Welker and company, where they're doing more slot type of things. It's no longer just the Randy Moss show, stretching out the field and taking the top off the defense. Now it's more of the what's been criticized and called the dink and dunk Tom Brady offense, but that dink and dunk Brady offense and the Patriots got them back to another Super Bowl in 2011. And that Patriot team probably wasn't the best in the AFC that year, but they got back to another Super Bowl in 2011. They didn't win that one either, losing to the same New York Giants and Eli Manning's second ring and Coughlin's second ring and getting Eli Manning a little overrated historically. But the Giants got their number. Ironic for where Belichick started his at least NFL emergence in his football life. But that then wasn't the end of the line, because then you see a little bit of that kind of flounder way. You see Wes Welker leaving and going with Peyton Manning and having success there in Denver and getting to a Super Bowl game with the Broncos, even though they'd win the year after he left, and he kind of was the cursed guy through this whole Brady-Peyton run of the 2000s, but it was still about Brady versus Peyton and that rivalry between two Hall of Fame quarterbacks, because around this period of time, Tom Brady now is in the conversation as the best in the game, in the conversation as the best ever already at this time. You're seeing MVP awards. You're seeing his game be better, even though the team not winning as much and not doing the 3 out of 4 things of Lombardi trophies and the 2 Super Bowl appearances, but they didn't win. But then they would eventually get back there again. This now 3 years in a row, as you're seeing them now, 3 years in a row. And they're not doing a Bills thing because they already got one. They already got that Super Bowl championship over the Seattle Seahawks, and Marshawn Lynch maybe should have ran it in there to nail that into the coffin of New England and give them another Super Bowl loss, but it didn't happen, so they get the win. They get the victory over Seattle, derailing what could have maybe been a dynasty there. They already were Super Bowl champions over Denver. And I know they lost to the Philadelphia Eagles, and I know Nick Foles and that Cinderella magic carpet ride of a story, and I know that Brady, by the way, threw over 500 yards in that game, despite it being a loss, and that went down to the wire. And Belichick making a couple controversial decisions, including not to start a guy who was a decent player for that team for years, and the whole controversy that rumbled around there. But Gronk emerging as a future Hall of Famer when healthy, even though he's been injury prone, so they haven't always had him on the field. That was getting around the time, these 3 straight years of Super Bowl appearances, which could easily be 4th again next year if these guys aren't going to retire, and they have said publicly they're not, at least Brady. But you're seeing a whole different cast of characters now. You're seeing the McCourty, now the McCourty twins. He gets both from there on this team. You're seeing such a difference and a lot of criticism levied to this Patriot defense, especially, which is ironic because that helped lead them to championships in the early 2000s. There's not a Mean Joe Green and Jack Ham or a Ronnie Lott. None of those defenders. There's not even the exact same offensive line that, say, the Dallas Cowboys of the early 90s could claim. And I didn't mean to forget them earlier, but obviously one of the greatest dynasties in football history with 3 championships in a 4-year period and close calls and championship game appearances if you extend that to 3 out of 6. And 3 Hall of Famers just in the triplets on offense. But that offensive line, one of the greatest ever. The Patriots' defensive line, their offensive line, I know that stayed together. It was moving on. It was moving parts constantly for New England, and that's the critical part of a team, especially through an era, especially when you're building a dynasty. But now Julian Edelman becomes the guy. He becomes the new Wes Welker type of guy, that slot receiver, the white, to be literal, slot receiver, catching passes, extending first downs, but not really a Randy Moss type of guy. They never had an all-pro running back. They had Kevin Falk in the early 2000s. You're seeing White and a few others. They had LeGarrette Blount in the beginning of this recent run. But it's mostly been a running back by committee situation. There's never really been a 1,500-yard stud on these Patriot teams, which watch some Le'Veon Bell shows in terms of his worth. They kind of prove that the running position is not a position you want to pay that much to. Anyway, I'll digress here. So the point of it is, as I give you the timeline, and here I said this recently on Twitter, so it's not just for this show, taking into account the continuous roster turnover and the era they're doing it in, I'll go one step further. Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, and the Patriots are the greatest dynasty in sports history. And that's answering a column from a colleague of mine and a friend of mine saying the Patriots were the best football dynasty of all time. So I'm even going one step further in that tweet. And I just detailed on why they're the best football dynasty of all time here in this show. And I'll stand by that again. They were great teams throughout NFL history. There's been a lot of dynasties, and it doesn't take away what the Steelers of the 70s did. They owned that decade. One of the greatest defenses of all time. All those Hall of Famers and legends, they're nothing to be embarrassed about. Still be proud of that. And it built you to be, again, Pittsburgh names best city for football. That started there. Best city for football. Be proud of that still. I'm not going to be totally negative on Pittsburgh Steelers fans. They're the best in the game. I'll give you that. And the 1970 Steelers, the Steel Curtain Steelers, were one of the best dynasties in pro football history. Maybe runner-up. Top 3, I'll give you. Top 5 for sure. No one will argue that now. Even still. But not the best. Sorry. Just not the best. And the Patriots are for sure the best, whether you want to hear it or not. Their continuous roster turnover. There were only 2 constants the entire run. From 2001, in the regular season, when Brady took over for Bledsoe, and they went on eventually at the end of that regular season to get into the Super Bowl, and then won that Super Bowl in the calendar year then when 2002 became the year. And so now, 9th Super Bowl appearance during this run. No other dynasty in NFL history, no other stretch of time of success for a quarterback coach individuals, or just really collective for a franchise over a stretch of time, say a decade at most. Even if I go 15 years at most. There's none that have appeared in 9 Super Bowls together, quarterback and coach. None. No other quarterback and head coach combo has appeared in as many Super Bowls as Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. No other ones have appeared in 9 together. The Steelers have the most Lombardi trophies ever in terms of wins as a franchise at 6. There's others with 5, but they have the most at 6. Brady and Belichick with 1 more win will tie them and have 6 just apiece as individuals. And they then would have the most Super Bowl Lombardi trophies, most championships as individuals in NFL history. There's nobody else alive, dead, or otherwise in the history of the sport that had ever won 6. One guy with 5, and that's it. And they would then have, they now both have, the 3 of them with 5. They would then have 6. And they'd be doing it with 1 franchise because the guy with 5 didn't. And the Niners and Cowboys, he's splitting between those 2. 6. And a quarterback and head coach is a little different than doing it as a lineman. Sorry. The continuous turnover, the difference of the team and how it was built and the era it was happening in, the changing of era, the rivalry with other legends during that time, playing in the same era of a Drew Brees, a Peyton Manning, a Brett Favre, even some of his career, an Aaron Rodgers, and still being the best of that bunch. And Ben Roethlisberger, too, add him in, Hall of Famer for sure. They didn't always have the Randy Moss All-Pro, though. They had him for a brief of time, a few years. And that wasn't even a time period where they won a championship. They won undefeated in the regular season, won an AFC crown, and lost the Super Bowl with Moss. They won championship with Deion Branch and Edelman. And Gronk when he's on IR and not even playing. They got there with Ocho Cinco and 200 yards receiving and having him be the name of that team besides Brady, but not doing anything that year. Those other dynasties can't say that. Yeah, Joe Gibbs might have done it with a few different quarterbacks in the Redskins, but most of that team was otherwise the same. Doug Williams, Joe Theismann, I get it, but they had the Hogs. They had the same offensive line through all those championships. All those 3 Lombardi trophies for Joe Gibbs and the Skins. Yeah, there's 2 quarterbacks, Joe Montana winning 4 and Steve Young winning 1 for the Niners run. And yeah, Steve Young or Jerry Rice was only there for 3 of them, but they had the same, mostly the same defense. Or here's the difference. When they bring in a guy like Deion Sanders in 94 for that Steve Young championship, or say when other franchises have brought in guys and have changed the roster a little bit and then won again during their dynasties, they did it for a luxury. They did it because they could, and they just brought in somebody they didn't really need. They put him over the hump and really helped the cause, but wasn't fully necessary because they already were such a great team. The Patriots did that as well. Obviously, the Junior Seaus, the Rodney Harrisons, and it helped them win more championships and win more games and keep alive as a contender. But they also had to do it more than the other teams because the roster kept having to turn over with free agency, with money going out of control, with TV, with different deals, with beer companies, with all the drama, and even Aaron Hernandez and that scandal they had to get over. That would have crippled other franchises. And it's, they had a murder on the team. Not necessarily their fault. They didn't know that going in, but they knew he was a bad guy. They drafted him anyway. They haven't been the most morally sound franchise. We know that from different scandals they're in. But even if you go to their scandals, you go to Deflategate, for example, the most recent one. They were destroying the Colts in that AFC Championship game. They would have won that game with a bar of soap. So even if they were deflating the football, they still dominated that game. And Brady's stats were actually better when the football was supposedly fully inflated and it wasn't even deflated. So yes, the deflation maybe was their fault. Maybe they did it intentional. We're never going to know that. They'll never admit it. It'll be Barry Bonds on steroid type of thing. They're going to go to their death never admitting that. But unlike him, it didn't need to happen. It didn't help them that much because they weren't just great prior like Bonds. They were literally better without that advantage. Brady's numbers and that team performed better in that game when the football was exactly where the Colts would want it and where every team would want it and fully deflated. When it was deflated, they were worse. Look at the numbers from that game. So you can't pick and point to those things and ruin the entire era because the era was so wildly successful for those two. For those two, right there. The guy screaming, pointing, the guy clapping, and even the owner. Greatest owner in football history with all the success of the Patriots and Robert Kraft, like him or not politically. Greatest owner in football history, even over the Rooney family, over the Moras. Bill Belichick, greatest coach, bar none, for sure, in football history. Look at the accomplishments. No one's even close. And yes, Lombardi is there with championships, but two of them were Super Bowls. 4 were just NFL titles. The level of competition wasn't even close back then. There were less teams. Guys didn't go anywhere else. Didn't have to deal with roster turnover. Wasn't dealing with psychology. There wasn't drama. The media wasn't the same. Totally different game and way easier at that time. Less to do there. No reason why Belichick wouldn't have had success at that time, and there's a chance Lombardi wouldn't have had success with these days, the day and age type of player. Look at Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, or at least the most accomplished for sure. The numbers are there, 50-plus thousand passing yards. The touchdowns are there with 400-plus touchdown passes. The MVP awards are there. I already detailed 2007, and then there were a few others when he finally got an All-Pro Hall of Fame receiver like Randy Moss. Still only a few years where he's had that because Gronk's been hurt so much, and he is technically a tight end. Nine Super Bowl appearances. Nine Super Bowl appearances. 5 championships. Could be 6. And this show's really evergreen regardless, because I want to make this clear too as we kind of round things out. This is obviously before they played the Rams franchise now in Los Angeles for the second time in a Super Bowl. So maybe that's how the dynasty finally ends, where it began, in beating the Rams. They played 2 different franchises twice during this run. And those franchises continuously turned over. Those franchises had different quarterbacks that weren't even alive back then or were young kids, different head coaches, different rosters, different mentalities, everything was totally different. From when they played the Eagles the first time with Andy Reid and McNabb in TO to when Nick Foles and the Eagles beat them with Doug Peterson as a young head coach just last year. Going 1-1 against that franchise in the big game with Brady and Belichick. And now the Rams are literally having moved from St. Louis, being horrible for all those years after the 0-1 game, but they're no longer in St. Louis anymore. Now they're back in Los Angeles where they were prior to going to St. Louis. They're in their second Super Bowl in franchise history in Los Angeles, the first losing to the Steelers back in '79. The 2 in St. Louis, winning 1. Kurt Warner gone, Marshall Faulk gone. They're already in Hall of Fame. They're on NFL Network covering this damn game, for crying out loud. Obviously a new head coach, a coach who's barely a little bit older than me, and is a head coach in the Super Bowl, and Sean McVay. Only 33, could be the youngest coach to ever win the Super Bowl. Jared Goff, young, only in his 3rd year. They already dealt with Jeff Fisher and got him out of town, and finally able to win after the curse of never being over 500 with Jeff Fisher is gone. Ndamukong Suh, Aaron Darnold for the Pitt product, best defensive player in the league. Aqib Talib now on that defense. Wade Phillips already winning a Super Bowl with Denver, now going over to doing the same thing as D coordinator with the Rams, maybe trying to make a case for the best defensive coordinator in league history, or at least one of them. Todd Gurley. These are young players that are now some of the best in the league. Totally different. Catastrophic, even more of a change than the Eagles were, but catastrophic change, even moving locations from where they were when the beginning of this dynasty got ignited with Brady and Belichick. And the Patriots are totally different too, but Brady and Belichick are still there. They're the constant. They're the norm. They're the 9 Super Bowl appearances, the 5 Lombardi trophies, could be 6. And even if they lose this game and you win 1 out of the 3 years and 3 years in a row, still getting their 3 years in a row is a tremendous accomplishment, like the Bills getting their 4 years in a row. Bills didn't win any, though. The Patriots at least won 1 of these in this recent run, so they have that. They don't have to worry about Scott Norwood and any type of recent curse and any angst there historically. And they could easily be back again. Brady, 0% chance retiring after the game. Belichick, maybe he finally will. We know there's a little controversy and drama with Garoppolo. Maybe there's a inner feud between them, and I'd love to see that displayed on a 30 for 30 someday. I'm sure they make movies about that otherwise. But regardless, Brady will be back. Belichick probably will stay around as long as Brady does. So looking at a few more years, Brady's hinted at 45 years old, which puts him 4 more years through the league. Little dip to his play this year, but still, look where they are, even with the dip to his play. He's a Hall of Famer, he's a legend, but that system, that team, can also be responsible. And the Patriots, with their constant turnover, the fact they're doing it in this era, the fact they're dealing with free agency, drama, national media, everything they've had to deal with. Some self-inflicted on their scandals, some not so much. Just because players are moving teams and want more money elsewhere, and players having to take less money to stay there if they do. But no other franchise in football history dealt with that during their dynasty. And really, I know the Celtics of the 60s and Bill Russell and Red Auerbach won all those championships. I know the New York Yankees franchise, the most successful franchise in pro sports history, with 27 championships, and so many of them in the late 20s, 30s, and 40s, where they really owned decades, and then even again in the 60s. 70s too, but not as much. 80s, no, but 90s, we know the 4 out of 5. We know the recent Derek Jeter run with the Yankees and Joe Torre. I know the Detroit Red Wings in the National Hockey League, all those playoff years, 25 playoff seasons in a row, 4 Stanley Cups, 6 appearances in the Stanley Cup final, including those 2 against the Penguins. And even if you go, that kind of extending things a little bit for the franchise, because that's 2 different cast of characters, the Datsuk Zetterberg days, and then earlier the Yzerman, Shanahan, those days with Scotty Bowman as the head coach. But say you just go from 95 to 2002, that would put them in 3 Stanley Cups in 4 appearances, and that's a great run. That's kind of the modern-day NHL dynasty for that short period of time. The Blackhawks winning 3 recently. The Penguins winning 3 recently over a decade stretch with Crosby and Malkin and company. Different head coaches, different players a little bit from the 2 Cup finals against Detroit and then the 1 win, and then the 2 recent back-to-back Cup championships with Phil Kessel and a few other different players. Chris Letang, a carryover, of course, and Marc-Andre Fleury, and then the whole Matt Murray-Fleury debate. I know about Shaq and Kobe's Lakers. I know about Magic Johnson's Lakers, Larry Bird, and Kevin McHale's Celtics of the 80s. I know about even the back-to-back Rockets titles in the 90s, in the middle of the Bulls, Jordan, Pippen, Phil Jackson, Dennis Rodman on the last 3, but not on the first 3. So similar teams, but a little different added on. 6 championships in 8 years, and probably would have been 8 in a row, like the 60s Celtics did, if it wasn't for leaving for 2 years for either playing minor league baseball or maybe a gambling suspension, which we'll let Anthony touch on the gambling man. That'll be a little rumor, and that's been depicted in some films. So 6 rings, I know all about it. I know about the Spurs' spread out run with Popovich and Tim Duncan and David Robinson early on, and those championships in the 5 they won, and then the recent ones against LeBron and the Heat. And then I know about LeBron 2 out of 4, but 4 years in a row with LeBron, D. Wade, and Chris Bosh, and the Big 3, and the changing of the NBA with those colluding of stars getting together, or at least doing it on their own, not just being put together by the owner or whatever. There's been dynasties and there's been levels of success and consistent runs throughout sports history, professional sports history, anything. There has been. I get it. There's USC in college football. Little spurt there in the early 2000s with Pete Carroll, Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, Lendell White. I know the U going all the way from the late 80s to the early 2000s, different cast of characters, of course, but just dominance over college football. And all those scandals, they had to roller coaster ride of success, but it was there with championships. I mean, go back through history. USC again, Oklahoma. I mean, Woody Hayes' Ohio State Buckeyes. John Wooden in UCLA. Coach K and Duke for so many years, and all these different players. Obviously, is going to be turnover in college sports. So college sports are a little bit different because there's consistent turnover in the North Carolinas as well. But just a changing of the guard constantly forced by just graduation, if nothing else. And then now the one and done, different than players who would stay for so many years. But again, speaking on pro sports, speaking on when you have turnover that is forced to turnover, and unlike colleges where you turn it over and then a decade later you're back to win championships. No, the Patriots, they had their little, drought, but they were still in the Super Bowl, even though they didn't win those 2 in that decade stretch where they didn't win 1. They were in 2. Getting there is a big accomplishment. It's a part of these 9. Getting there is the first battle, and it absolutely is an accomplishment in and of itself. So getting there is something. It's better to get there than to not get there, of course. But they always were relevant. Only 1 season during this stretch with Belichick and Brady together is under 10 wins. Only 1 is less than double-digit victories. They had only one of those few years where they missed the playoffs. I believe 2002 when the Bucs won, and then I think it was 2010 before the 2011 Super Bowl appearance when Matt Castle was the quarterback and Brady got hurt. But Matt Castle actually led them to 11 wins. So they actually had 11 wins. They just didn't make the playoffs. That's how dominant the AFC was at that time. And they couldn't squeak in as a wild card. But, guys, like it or not, and soak it in, because it's the truth. The Patriots are the greatest sports dynasty ever. But even if you want to argue some of the others in sports, maybe we could have that conversation, but I'll still argue for the Patriots because of the turnover and because of what they dealt with in their sport. But for sure for football, the New England Patriots answer the question, are the Patriots the greatest NFL dynasty ever? Yes. Yes, they are. That answers it. There's really no debate. It doesn't matter if they win any more Lombardi trophies or they get in the Super Bowl anymore. They've done enough. Brady and Belichick, even more than just saying the Patriots, that really should say, are Tom Brady and Bill Belichick together the greatest NFL dynasty ever? Because yes, that is the case. It's not just the franchise. It's those two guys. But Brady and Belichick together, they're the New England Patriots, are the greatest NFL dynasty ever, and they've made the Patriots one of the greatest franchises overall in history that could tie for Lombardi trophies because of their run that already has the most appearances when they were really an average franchise for decades upon decades before, even though they got in a couple Super Bowl appearances and lost those two in 85 and 96 at the beginning of this. But, man, the 70 Steelers were great. They made Pittsburgh America's best city for football. It started there. It started there. That's still the lifeblood. That's still your father and teaching you and grandfather maybe, depending on how old you are. But that's still the lineage. It happened there to get Pittsburgh now named America's best city for football. Read all about it. SteelersNow.com. SteelersNow.com. But I'm sorry. The truth hurts, but the truth can't be denied anymore. The New England Patriots, Bill Belichick, the greatest coach of all time, and Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, together, and the New England Patriots of this dynastic 2000s era run, 9 Super Bowl appearances, 5 wins as we stand, maybe 6 coming up, is head and shoulders above the rest. Belichick and Brady, the New England Patriots, they're the greatest NFL football dynasty of all time. There's no debate. Sorry, not sorry. And that's win or lose come Sunday. Make sure to hit up SteelersNow.com where you can find articles like talking about Pittsburgh being the greatest football city right now ever, or currently, or whatever it is, so you don't have to worry about all the drama. Take a little break from it, but you can also get all the drama, the Antonio Brown shows, and all that content, all the news and notes and analysis. SteelersNow.com. Also go to the mothership of all motherships here in our little family, PittsburghSportsNow.com, Kongursky's PittsburghHockeyNow.com, PittsburghSoccerNow.com. Again, SteelersNow.com is the newest one, so it deserves 2 plugs as it's trying to get itself off the ground, but I'm doing my best here. Thanks to all the drama, it's being helped a little bit. And, of course, PGHSportsLive.com, finding this show, the rest of our shows, our golden quality content archived for all eternity or until I take it off. There, PGHSportsLive.com. Follow us on Twitter, at PGH Sports Live on Twitter. Find us on YouTube. Click subscribe on the YouTube channel here, right there, Pittsburgh Sports Live. Type it in your search bar on YouTube. And there you go. Click subscribe. Click subscribe. Little button there if you're still watching the show somehow, even though you probably are mad because you're a Steeler fan, I'd imagine. Click subscribe there on YouTube. And send any of your hate mail or any of your comments, questions at MikeAsti11 for me on Twitter. The Patriots have been conquering the National Football League, all the cast of characters, all the stars, all the fellow Hall of Famers, the entire era, all the scandals, everything and everything through different eras of the NFL, as long as they had Tom Brady and Bill Belichick as the greatest dynasty in NFL and football history, maybe sports history. And I'm here still. I don't know if I'll have the longevity of them, though, but I can only dream because that's the best. Conquering sports radio one day at a time.